Dr. Stain and members of SAGES, thank you very much. I'm honored to have been asked to present this afternoon and to be in the company of former presidents of SAGES, international experts, and the like. So the first thing I'm going to say is my disclosure. I'm an employee of Fair Health. Fair Health was created when, at that time, the Attorney General of New York, Andrew Cuomo, sued Ingenix and United Health Group for manipulating the out-of-network database. The entity that was created out of that was Fair Health. The views, opinions, and positions that I'm going to express are mine, and they do not necessarily reflect those being official views of Fair Health. I do have personal possession of shares in EndoChoice and Early Bird Alert. So in an ideal world, the FDA is here. The FDA is nuts about it, okay? The reality in practice, things can be very, very different when the FDA says yes, but insurers say no. Device manufacturers have devoted years, millions, trying to win regulatory approval for new products, but all that work can be for naught if you don't have the data. If you do not have the data, you're not going to be able to persuade insurers to pay for the products once they hit the market. Ron is absolutely enlightened what's taking place in Albany. I wish that the rest of the insurers were the same. So the milestones in development for medical devices, obviously, we all have a great idea. We develop a business plan, proof of concept, we raise some money, we run some clinical trials, we meet with the FDA, we get lucky, we get approval, we go to the commercialization phase, and we hope to get to a liquidity event. However, there's two problems with that. If you deal with private equity or venture capital, they ask the question, do you have a code and do you have coverage? And then, of course, the big problem is once you get FDA approval and you go to the marketplace and people aren't paying for you or they aren't covering your service, it doesn't bode well when you're trying to sell your company or sell your device or go public. So how does a new item or service fit into our healthcare system? Well, obviously, the key things is that there's many different sources who may purchase it. It could be the facility, it could be the physician, it could be a group purchasing organization. So device manufacturer sells the product, someone's got to pay for it, a claim gets admitted, and then the insurance industry, whether it's government or commercial, ideally pays for it. And the dilemma, of course, is the reimbursement trends, that for years we have recognized that Medicare underpays. Therefore, we have built a whole complex based on overcharging and getting overpayments from the commercial payers. But clearly, this is beginning to narrow. We are all starting to see, for example, narrow networks as part of the exchange or marketplace plans where payment rates are coming down to close to or even at Medicare rates. And for those of you who have not lived in California, Southern California for years has been known where Medicare is the best payer. Commercial payers are paying anywhere from 70 to 90% of Medicare. Medi-Cal pays 56% of Medicare. And you know, when you go into other parts of the country and people are getting paid at 140 to 200% of Medicare rates, you realize that something's going to happen soon. So we're really moving from a fee-for-service to a fee-for-value mentality. You've heard earlier today the focus on value, quality, improving safety, efficiency, outcomes, and the value of care. The right test, the right service for the right patient in the right setting at the right time by the right individual so that we're delivering cost-effective care. And it's an opportunity, if you think about, for all of us to collaborate, for the physicians to work together with our facilities and for us to work together with device manufacturers to share financial risk as we try to improve clinical outcomes. And that's probably the big thing that's been missing. If you think about healthcare reform also, focuses on providers. I don't think any of us went to medical school to be a provider. I think we're all healthcare professionals. But people always talk about hospitals and doctors have to take the risk. And the question, of course, is where's the device industry? Where's the diagnostic industry? Where's the pharmaceutical industry? Why aren't they coming up to the table? Why aren't they joining with us? And why aren't they partners in taking risk and at the same time sharing in profits? So the challenges of healthcare value-based purchasing places pressures on hospitals and physicians to eliminate redundancy inappropriate, unnecessary, and costly care. Bundled services define quality and efficiency. As a disclosure, the AGA has developed a bundled payment methodology around colorectal cancer screening. And it's very, very, in some cases, preliminary because it only focuses on the non-surgical care, because it's very difficult, as we found, to get the data to develop an absolute true episode of care that covers non-surgical as well as surgical care and trying to do actuarial assessment for complications. Instead of how much did you do, value-based care is really how well did the patient do. We're trying to redesign care. You have to break down silos because it's becoming very apparent there is no plan B. Now, the world of reimbursement comes down to coding, coverage, and payment. You can get paid without having a code. Having a code does not guarantee that you're going to get covered. And so people spend a lot of time trying to figure out, do I need a code or do I have the data? And I will say, for those of you in the room and others listening, the key is the data. Okay? If you've got data showing that the new procedure, the device, okay, if it's published, peer-reviewed data, that's going to get you a lot further than basically saying, I really want it, and it's really cool and nifty. Coverage is really a legal document. It's terms and conditions used by payers to determine whether a product, a service, procedure is eligible for reimbursement and under what conditions it will be covered. The fundamental question that most ask, is it medically necessary to diagnose or treat the patient's condition? So if you're a device manufacturer or you've got a great idea, you need to start thinking about coverage at the same time that you're meeting with the FDA. Okay? You need to think about it, in fact, at the earliest time you're starting to do your research and development discussions. Coverage is distinct from FDA approval. Companies that start thinking about collecting the data during the time that they're in their pivotal trials usually have anywhere from a 1 to a 4-year head start in getting coverage because they have the data. And once they're released, the more data that they have, the easier it is for the payer to say, I can cover this, it's medically necessary, it shows an improvement in health outcomes. Many of you think that Medicare is this monolith, and the most interesting thing is that there's a lot of things Medicare covers, and they just don't talk about it. In fact, as Medicare has consolidated the contractors from 38 to now 9, and soon probably closer to 6 in the coming years' time, if you look, there's actually very few local coverage determinations. So silence is golden. In reality, also, there's very few national coverage determinations. But increasingly, as we've seen, especially in the last few years' time, Medicare requires that treatments have to show to advance health outcomes. So you have to ask a question. Who is the beneficiary of your product? Is it a senior? Is it a woman? Is it someone with rare diseases? Is it a child? Where's the benefit going to be delivered? What's the expected outcomes? What's the financial impact? And are the benefits immediate or long-term? Because remember, if you have something that's going to be beneficial to someone a decade in the future, why will the insurer pay for it today? Payers may classify devices or tests as being innovative, which fulfills a compelling unmet need, replacing existing test and technology. So is it better? Does it get better outcomes? Is it durable? Does it get it done quicker? Is it less expensive overall? Does it move things from the inpatient setting to the outpatient setting? Or is it additive? And so some of the technologies that you start thinking about it, you ask the question, is it an improvement on how I do surgery today that helps me to do a better job? Or is it a totally innovative new way of thinking about things? So you think about it from the standpoint of how payers approach us, okay? And the question is, with this new device, with this new technology and the like, am I going to still do the usual therapy? Am I going to do a different therapy? And if I do a different therapy, does it lead to a better outcome, a usual outcome, or a worse outcome? So clearly, if your new device, new technology leads to a different way of approaching things that leads to a better outcome, you win. Now, we've talked and kind of danced around the question of reasonable and necessary, but it's an important thing to understand from a coverage perspective. Both Medicare and third-party payers third-party payers are the BUCAs, Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna, Humana, the like, the BUCAs. So CMS and the third-party payers have adopted an evidence-based framework for coverage decisions, and they're looking for evidence to conclude that your device improves health outcomes. What population is it applicable for? Is it as good or as better than existing alternatives? Clearly, non-inferiority, which may be acceptable in pharmaceuticals, isn't going to be acceptable in device, certainly not acceptable in a surgical environment. Does it show cost effectiveness compared to the gold standard? And are there comparative clinical studies, as you've heard earlier in the session earlier this afternoon, comparative effectiveness studies? So I've taken here in the next two slides payer definitions for medical necessity, okay? When making a decision regarding the medical necessity of a technology and or procedure, payers consider medically necessary services, okay, that a medical practitioner exercising prudent clinical judgment would provide to a covered individual for the purpose of preventing, evaluating, diagnosing, or treating an illness, injury, or disease, or its symptoms that are in accordance with generally accepted standards of medical practice, clinically appropriate, considered effective for the covered individual's illness, not primarily for the convenience of the covered individual, and not more costly than an alternative service or sequence of services, at least as likely to produce equivalent therapeutic or diagnostic results of the diagnosis and treatment. Very, very interesting. So you're mixing medical necessity and cost. And the question is, traditionally, insurers think in terms of silos. I have my pharmacy silo, my doctor's silo, my hospital silo. So if you have a device that is more costly, but it moves patients from an inpatient environment paid on a DRG to an outpatient environment, if it gets the patient out of the hospital quicker, if it returns to work quicker, improves people's functional outcomes quicker and better, then the question is the payer looking at it horizontally from the overall cost of care? Here's the same payer's definition of investigational services. When making decisions regarding an investigational status, it is considered that any procedure, treatment, supply, device, equipment, facility, or drug are determined not to, A, have final approval from the appropriate government regulatory body. Okay, if it's not FDA approved, they won't cover it. Now, you could then ask the question, well, what about what they call their LDTs? You know, laboratory tests that aren't FDA approved, and do they cover that? I'm kind of silent on that question. Or, has the credible scientific evidence published in peer-reviewed medical literature? What is the definition of peer-reviewed medical literature? Are we talking about Annals? Are we talking about the New England Journal? Are we talking about the Mongolian Journal of Yak Herding and Laparoscopic Surgery? Probably not the latter, even though it may be a peer-reviewed literature. Recognized by the relevant medical community, which permits reasonable conclusions concerning the effect of the procedure, drug, and the like. Or be proven to improve the net health outcomes, or be as beneficial as any established alternative, or show improvement outside of the investigational settings. Well, they've created, in effect, a very interlocking set of positions that makes it very difficult to adopt new technology. So from an ally and adversary standpoint, a payer may not want to cover a new device if it were to increase costs without better outcomes. Government programs are increasingly using budget neutrality, such as the bill that the President signed this past week, which is going to, in effect, look at all of our surgical procedures and look at things that have high intensity and high times and place that under review over the next coming years under a misvalued code initiative in order to, so that's an issue. And why would I want to pay for expensive new technologies if it's going to increase my payments? And hospitals and physicians, well, the first time you do things, that's okay, but if the hospital doesn't get paid the second or the third time, is the hospital really running a charity care program? So when we start thinking about health outcomes, and if you are thinking about a device or bringing a device to market, you have to think about, does it improve function? Is life longer? Is there symptom improvement? Is there a reduced need for downstream tests? Can you demonstrate that? Have you documented that? Does the literature show that? And comparative effectiveness has become increasingly important in coverage policy development. In this day and era, government and the private sector has invested in registries and health technology assessments to obtain information regarding the efficacy of drugs and devices. 2 weeks ago, the AGA, in partnership with others, has started the first observational registry looking at comparing LNF and TIF. The co-PIs are Scott Melvin and Brian Fenerty. Clearly, the goal is to try to answer these questions from an efficacy standpoint. The application of comparative effectiveness, obviously payers are prudent purchasers of healthcare services, and the implementation is value-based purchasing and care coordination. Now, I've mentioned CMS's national coverage with evidence development. CMS has recently issued a series of CEDs over recent years where they have said, in effect, they will cover a technology if it is part of study with, coverage with study participation. So, for example, Medicare has looked at covering PET scans. They have looked at covering certain types of wound care therapies, such as autologel, which is platelet-rich plasma, and others in a mechanism where they say they will issue a G-code, which covers payment. They will not pay because the government is precluded by law from paying for the cost of data collection. But the fact is that they have identified a mechanism and a methodology to pay for emerging technologies as long as data is collected to show, does it work? Is it effective? Is it durable? Are the outcomes good? And this is the coverage with study participation model. So the reality for stakeholders, revenue pressures are going to intensify for all of us. In case you haven't heard, last night, Medicare decided that it's going to release what it paid for us in 2012. They will release a file identifying physicians by NPI number. It will show what we billed and what they paid, and it's going to be aggregate data, and they've threatened to release that as early as April the 9th, so it's coming soon. So people are going to be looking at these types of questions. And once people look at these questions of what we in hospitals are getting paid, it's clear that reimbursement rates are going to be under pressure. Payment will migrate towards value-based quality payments. I think new core competencies, are required for success. We're going to have to collaborate. It's not win-lose. It has to be a win-win collaboration. It's collaboration amongst professionals, collaboration with facilities, collaboration with the device manufacturing industry. It is an opportunity for the industry to work with us to effectively deal with these changes. One of these changes, for example, is a center of excellence or service line approach, where you collect the data, demonstrate the impact on clinical and financial outcomes, incorporate revenue cycle and population health analyses, and requires, again, collaboration among stakeholders. So this is kind of, again, sort of like the summary. If you're not thinking about data collection early on, and if you don't have a publication strategy embedded into your device development strategy, you're going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to trying to get coverage. Clearly, peer-reviewed literature, well-designed studies, not anecdotal reports, case study reports, are going to be increasingly important in helping to establish coverage. Because to be successful, you must never, ever, ever think outside of the box. Thank you.